even those who are devotees of other gods worship them with faith. They also sacrifice to me alone, O son of Kunti, Arjuna, but not according to the true law. Those who are devotees of other gods and perform penances for the gods actually are performing penances for the Supreme Soul, only that they do not know who they are performing penances for. In simple language, you can say that such people are devotees of other gods. Anavishya devatasya iti anya devataha and tafan bhaktaha iti anya devata bhaktaha. Adi Shankaracharya says that because such devotees perform penances for other gods, they forget the Supreme Entity and remain confined in small labels, small superstitions, small boundaries, and small sects. Anasu devatasya bhaktaha anya devata bhaktaha. They do perform devotion, and Shri Krishna is not trying to hurt their feelings. They perform devotion, and they perform devotion right. Shri Krishna says here that they perform yajanta, worship. But these people in the end are worshipping the Supreme Soul. When one is taught sangha and has a sacred thread tied down them, then the verse comes out at the end that just like the way the rain falls and all the water of the different rivers end up in the sea, in the same way, Sarvadeva Namaskaram Kesham Pratigachati. To all the Udana, to all the gods, because they all at the end lead us to the Supreme Energy. This is where they all go in the end. But if we go there in the end, then what if a person makes a decision to do things for the Supreme Energy? Shri Krishna is saying that they ultimately come to him, but they do not even know that they are coming towards him. That is why devotees who worship other gods are actually worshipping the Supreme Energy. And not only that, but these people worship with faith, as Shri Krishna has used the word, look at this verse, Shraddhayan Vittaha. These people are convinced of the reality of the world to come. Shraddhaya Ashita Buddhaya Anta Anugataha. They do it with faith, and yet they do not sacrifice according to the true law. In this verse, look at the words. We must understand the phrase Avidhi Purvakam. Avidhi Purvakam. We must understand this. Srimad Adi Shankaracharya says that Avidhi means ignorance. Avidhi Agnanam Tat Purvakam Agnana Puralokam Yajante Iti Yattaha. Means ignorance. Three things come into this. The first is not according to Vedic injunctions. This is not according with what the scriptures say. This is because there are no sects in the Vedas. The more you go towards ancient times, and the more you go towards the source, then you find that all the divisions and sects decrease. I can say as an example, if there is a tree, then if you try to understand the tree through its leaves, then there are so many leaves, and each of these leaves are different. But if you go further inside, then all of these leaves are one branch. There are a fewer number of branches than leaves, the more you go towards the root. And yet there are so many branches. If you go even further inside, then all of these branches are connected to the trunk. And if you go inside the trunk, then the root is one. You should see it from this perspective. The further you go away from the root, then the more divisions and sects you create. But the more you go towards the roots, then there is no more divisions and no more sects. Secondly, they worship in ignorance. They perform penances, but in ignorance. This is because while performing devotion, they do not even know who they're performing devotion for. Guruji remembers the elder members of the audience. He watched old Bollywood films. Remember this? I don't. He remembers the example of a film he watched when he was young. You may remember the name of the film, but I don't want to say the name of the film. In this film, there's an actor and actress, and as usual, the actor was making efforts to do what it takes to make the actress fall in love with him. The actress was going to a temple of Shivji, and there was a big idol of Shivji outside of town. She was going to worship Shiva, and the actor was sitting there behind the idol in disguise. Whatever the actress would say, this actor would be sitting behind the idol and talk in a changed voice. This actress was innocent because she was from a village and would therefore talk a lot. Therefore, she would believe it that Shivji was telling her all of this. But how long could this last? Because wrong things never last. It does not last in films, so how can it last in real life? The conversation went on for about 7 sentences, and then the actress started wondering where these answers were coming from. Slowly and slowly, while she would be talking, the person would be answering in a changed voice. She then came and stood behind the idol and asked more questions while this actor continued answering. The only reason why Guruji remembers this now is at the beginning, the actress would be worshipping and getting answers in reply, thinking it is coming from the idol, but in fact it is not coming from the idol, and somebody else different is sitting there who is in love with her. But this woman considers that the voice is coming from the idol of stone. In the same way, when we are performing penances for the Supreme Truth, then we think that something came from where we're worshipping, but no, it comes from the Supreme Truth. We think that the thing we asked for came from the God we were worshipping, but in reality, this is just a channel and just the medium. We consider this medium to be the listener, and this is the biggest mistake that we make. The medium can never be the source. There are two things. When water comes out of the pipe and the tap in houses, then water does not come from the pipe and the tap. The water comes from rain, and rain comes from things stored in several places. Despite we think this, water comes from the tap. If it stopped raining, then the water would stop coming out of the tap by itself. Water does not come turning the tap is a medium. But those who do not know where water reality comes from just worship the tap. The creation of these different sects and divisions is such stupidity that it's like worshipping the tap. Look at the source. Shri Krishna says that such people are his ignorant devotees. When one does not recognize the root form of God, then eternal bliss that should come from worshipping God does not come there. This is the experience of all of us. We do many things in the name of worship, and yet we do not get the happiness that we should be getting. The reason for this is that we do not know and do not recognize who we are worshipping. There are three levels if one is to worship in the right way and if one wishes to develop and advance oneself. The very first requirement is that one should recognize God. Only then can worship take place, because how can you worship one who you do not recognize? The second requirement is that after recognizing God, and one begins understanding God more, then a love for God arises. Love for God is the second level. The third level is worship of God. Worship is not possible without love. And doing work for one who you worship, one who you love, is worship of that one. The person then has a wish to do work for one who he loves. When one is at the level of recognizing God, then one looks at what God is doing for them, and when one is in love, then one looks at what one is doing for God. This is worship. The person does not focus his attention on what he is getting, but looks at what he can give, and this is worship. Therefore, the three levels are recognizing God, love for God, and worship of God. If there is no recognition of God, then how can one worship God? This is what happens to us. Until one does not have a recognition of God, then one cannot see the worth of God and the importance of God. Great saints give the example that there was a stone in the person's house that was being passed down through generations. Spices and chilies were scraped using that stone. It had been passed down for years and years, and the stone just remained in the house. One time the person heard that there was a philosopher's stone that turns iron to gold upon touching it. The person thought that it would be so nice that if this would work, because instead of laboring, he could get a philosopher's stone. He went searching far away and ended up in the jungle. One person would tell him to go to one place, and another person would tell him to go to another place. This person would be searching for years, and yet did not find a philosopher's stone. He came back home upset. After he'd been back for a while, a great saint came to his house. The great saint saw the stone that was used to scrape spices and chilies. The great saint told him that this stone was a philosopher's stone. The person asked the great saint what he was talking about, because he had searched so far for the philosopher's stone, and he had been away from home for so long. The person told the great saint that he had wasted so many years of his life looking for the philosopher's stone, and yet could not find it. Yet this was a stone used to grind chilies and spices that had been passed down in his house for generations. He told the great saint that he does not know how for many years the stone has been in the house for. The great saint told him he would prove it to him, and asked him to bring something made of iron. The person brought an item made of iron, and the item made of iron turned to gold. This person fell at the great saint's feet and told the great saint that until now he was just grinding chilies and spices with that stone. The Supreme Soul in the form of the philosopher's stone is riding in your and my hearts. But people do not recognize the Supreme Soul, and because we don't recognize the Supreme Soul, our entire lives pass like a piece of iron. And iron just remains as an iron. What use is it if one does not recognize it? One does not recognize the value and the worth of life. The fault is not the lack of feelings of God, but the fault is ignorance of God. If one asks the question about where the Supreme Soul is, and asks them a question about whether they wish to see where God is, where is their recognition of God? The moment when one recognizes the Supreme Soul, then one sees the Supreme Soul at every moment and at every place. The recognition is not just about a lack of feeling in God, but about an ignorance and lack of recognition in God. For this, Shri Krishna uses the phrase Avidi Purvatam, and says here that such people do not worship according to the true law. I give one meaning of Avidi Purvatam, that whenever there is a big function like a wedding reception, all of a sudden a person comes and starts talking to you. They ask you how you are, and we say that we're fine. They ask you how the brother is, and you say that they're well. They ask you how your father's health is, and you say that their health is very good. You keep giving answers in your mind, but in your mind you do not know who is this that you've been speaking to for so long. They even talk about certain events and ask whether your parents have come back from Vidya. You wonder about how they know all of this. Just say that your parents have come back from Vidya. We keep giving answers, but we cannot ask them how they know all of this. We keep giving answers, and confusion runs into our minds about who these people are. We try to remember who these people are and where we must have met these people. The conversation runs for 5 to 10 minutes, and that person keeps asking about things that you posted 5 years ago. They ask whether everything is well since we last met them. They ask about your relatives who you never see anymore. Such a conversation just keeps running. You're talking, and yet you do not even know who you're talking to. At that moment, when you get a flash in your mind, when you recognize that this person is your relative, then when you begin talking to that person again, then there's such a big difference in the way you talk to that person. Before, you were talking to the person without recognizing who the person was, and you gave answers to the questions and the right answers. But after recognizing the person, the answers you gave to questions are given in a clear and calm way. When you are performing devotion of God, and when you go to speak with God every morning, you begin to say a lot. For example, Shri Krishna Sharam Mama, or Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. But while you're saying it, do you know who Vasudeva is? Do you know who Vasudeva is? You're trying to remember who Vasudeva is while chanting Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudeva, and start to wonder whether you have met. You keep doing this. But once you recognize Vasudevaya, then immediately you begin talking to Vasudevaya so realistically and so innocently. Talking to someone without recognizing who they are is avidi purvakam, not according to the true law, and talking to someone after recognizing them is vidi purvakam, according to the true law. That is why you can see so much innocence and naturalness in the life and the behavior of a true devotee. The bliss of such devotion is another thing, and the enjoyment of such a devotion is another thing after one recognizes God. The question may arise in our minds that, is God talking about recognizing, but how can you recognize God? God answers this by saying in the next verse that He is in every place. Let's go to the next verse.